The economics of public health provides two basic rationales for considering a health-related issue to be a public health issue. And these two rationales are the presence of negative externalities or the presence of positive externalities. Otherwise, in the absence of an externality, there are very important health issues that we've been studying all semester, but they're private health issues. What makes them public health issues is the spillover from one individual or group of individuals' decisions to other people outside the decision-making process. And then there's a whole new type of market failure that that could be improved upon by intelligent policy intervention. Not any policy intervention. There's plenty of examples of bad ones that make problems worse or cost a lot and don't make them any better. But there's at least room if there are negative or positive externalities associated with a market activity. There's room for potentially welfare improving government policy. So let's talk that through. I came up with this case of, I see I undid my labeling, market for antibiotics. Let's think about the case where there are no externalities. And let's talk about why economists are a little bit leery of interventions to alter market outcomes when there are competitive markets with no externalities. There are externalities in the case of antibiotics that our reading talked about and that I'm going to add later on. But let's just consider this fake case, this fictitious case, where there are no externalities. In that case, the quantity, let's say this will be the U.S. market, so million doses, whatever a dose is, per year. And then the price would be dollars per dose. I just don't have enough medical knowledge to say, oh, it's sold by the milligram or gram or whatever, a kilogram if it's a national market. All right, so we have a demand curve under normal circumstances. This is also, it turns out, the marginal private value function. And basically what we're saying is that at really high prices, there'd be quantity demand of antibiotics would be zero. Let's stretch this up to the y-axis. But as price falls, the first person's going to find that the benefits of buying a dose are greater than the costs. As the price falls, the second person's going to find that the prices become lower than their valuation of that dose. Third, fourth, fifth. It's the downward sloping demand function that we encountered earlier in the course. I think I've already explained why that's also the marginal value function. Now notice I'm adding P for private. We're going to differentiate between private and social value functions and cost functions. If there are no positive externalities, as there really aren't in this case, we would say that the marginal private value is also equal to the marginal social value function. All right, so there's this upward sloping supply curve typically. Sometimes we assume it's flat. In the short run, it's usually upward sloping to some degree, we think. This is, for reasons I've told you before, the supply curve in a competitive industry is the industry marginal cost curve. Now we're going to differentiate between marginal private costs and marginal social costs. Well, if there are no externalities, and for this moment, let's just assume there aren't, we know that the market's going to clear at the price and quantity where the supply and demand curve intersect. This means that everybody that values a dose of antibiotics at least as much as it costs gets the dose of antibiotics, but we're not producing any of these doses that would cost more than their value to anybody in society. So if we produce one less dose, we'd be giving up this positive benefit, this value over the cost, so we'd be reducing social well-being. if we produced one more, that would have cost more than the benefit, and we'd be reducing social well-being. So in the absence of externalities, if there are competitive markets, then this market outcome is the best possible outcome, at least in the sense it creates the most surplus. Remember that surplus is the area below the demand curve and above the supply curve that's value created by the existence of this market. So let's change things up a little bit. Let's suppose now that, let's do this in red. Red, sort of a negative color, I suppose. Let's suppose that now that there are externalities and that there are negative externalities. That's supposed to be a G. And I'm just going to abbreviate negative, NEG, period. In this case, the people making the antibiotics, getting them to market, etc., are incurring costs, and those are the private costs. But now there are some costs over and above the costs that people in the marketplace are bearing. And we know from our reading that these costs, the antibiotic costs, the more you use antibiotics, the more resistant human and animal populations become to those antibiotics, and that means that the usefulness of antibiotics in treating bacterial infections diminishes. So that cost of using more antibiotics today means they're likely to be less effective tomorrow. That's an additional cost. So the marginal social cost is going to be higher than the marginal private cost. Well, the problem is that people in the market think about their own costs, but not so much about other people's costs. This marginal social cost includes these private costs, but there's also these external costs, costs on people that aren't involved in these market decisions. Well, by the same logic we talked about before, if there are externalities, the socially best outcome isn't where the market brings us, but rather it's where marginal social values and marginal social costs are equal, and we'll call that Q star. And so we see that the market produces too much. So there's going to be a dead weight loss. Notice that if Q star is the best, every dose past Q star costs society, costs members of society more than it benefited members of society. So we're going to get this familiar dead weight loss. That's the reduction in surplus because of this externality problem. It's the reduction in surplus relative to the socially best level of surplus. So this is going to mean that a policy intervention that moves the market away from Q naught toward Q star, a policy that reduces the amount of antibiotics consumed by the economy, it has the potential of increasing social welfare. So what could be done? The easiest policy intervention, in the sense that it brings about a change in behavior of market participants in a desirable direction, and it produces revenues for government that would then let us reduce the taxes on good things. If we could tax more bad things, negative externalities, move markets toward efficiency, we could reduce taxes on the kinds of stuff that we tax now that really are good things that we like to promote: work effort, investment effort, etc., the transactions of goods and services within the economies that don't have externalities associated with them. We tax all of these. But a tax on negative externalities has the beauty of raising revenues for government to fund national defense or food inspection programs or health for the poor or whatever, while actually moving the market toward a more efficient outcome. Those are called Pigouvian taxes. Pigou sounds like Pigou was this French economist who realized that taxing negative externalities and subsidizing positive externalities could very, very efficiently and desirably improve on market outcomes. The other reason to advocate a Pigouvian tax in the presence of a negative externality is that in the real world, when we tax things like pollution, we find that some firms can clean up a lot for very, very little money, and other firms would be run out of business if they were forced to clean up. And a tax on pollution lets the firms that can clean up easily just say, hey, we're going to just clean up and not pay the tax. And so the firms that can clean up cheaply just clean up everything and don't pay any pollution taxes. But the tax gives an out to the firms that for which it would be very, very costly to clean up, and they could say, well, we can pay this tax and stay in business and not clean up. And so it beyond moving the market toward this better outcome, it also reallocates the cleanup responsibilities or the reduction in antibiotic use in this case. The people that'll give up using antibiotics, if we tax antibiotics, will be the people for whom using the antibiotics had very little benefit. By the way, in policy in the United States, the United States Department of Agriculture, USDA, is moving toward greatly reducing or even banning the use of antibiotics in feedlots for beef and pork, etc., and for chicken farms, which right now those operations, if it's not organic, use just massive quantities of antibiotics because these animals have to live in very close proximity to one another and in very close proximity to their own waste. And so you need to pump them full of antibiotics so they don't get sick and die. You get them to market. But anyway, this overuse of antibiotics has terrible social consequences. And it's gross to think about. It's why people become vegetarians or at least shift to eating organic.